What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Hanson. Welcome to Shifting Lanes. I'm sitting in a 2019 Jeep Cherokee Overland Edition. I'm here to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this completely new and facelifted Cherokee. So stick around and find out. So first, let's start off with the good. Like I mentioned before, this is a completely facelifted and brand new Jeep Cherokee. So it's got a new front bumper and it's got a new hood, and also it has a new headlight design. Now, if you've seen the older Cherokees, it's got a three-piece headlight assembly. It had a separate daytime running light, it had a separate main headlight, and also the fog light assembly. So with the completely redesigned headlight look, it looks more traditional, and overall it fits with the rest of the Jeep lineup. It looks like a slightly more aggressive Jeep Compass, but not as aggressive as the big brother, the Jeep Grand Cherokee. What I also like about this car is the 4x4 system. Now, if you look all around me, there's a lot of snow on the ground, and that's because we just went through one of the worst blizzards in recent memory. I live in New Jersey, so we just got hammered by a nor'easter. About 20 inches of snow fell in my backyard. A lot of trees went down and people lost power. So during that storm, I got this car, so I decided to go for a journey in unplowed roads around New Jersey, and I took it off-roading, and I'll show you some of the footage right now. But Jeep is just known for their off-road systems, their ability to go rock crawling and just defeat any sort of climate and terrain that's known to man. So with the Jeep Cherokee, it's equipped with the active drive system. Now, let's first talk about the Jeep 4x4 systems for a second, because if you're shopping for a Jeep, then you probably have heard various different terms. You've probably heard of Select Terrain, the Active Drive 1, the Active Drive 2. You've probably heard of Rock Track, Command Track, Quadra Drive, Quadra Track. There's just a bunch of different terms thrown around. If you're shopping around for a Jeep Renegade or a Jeep Compass or a Jeep Cherokee, then you really only need to concern yourself with the Jeep Active Drive system. The Jeep Active Drive is basically a fancy name for all-time all-wheel drive. So it's not the user selectable where there's a separate lever that you could engage either two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive mode. Active Drive is all-time all-wheel drive, and it's smart enough to figure out whether to go two-wheel drive or engage the four-wheel drive mode. With the Active Drive 1 system, you also get the Select Terrain knob. So the Select Terrain, basically it tells the car how much torque it needs to distribute between the front and the rear axle. So with the Select Terrain knob, you have four different modes. You have auto, you have snow, you have sport, and you also have sand mud. So in auto mode, that's basically where you want to leave the car most of the time. It knows, whether the road is dry or wet, and I'd say 90% of the time that you're driving, you could just leave it in auto mode. But when the weather gets kind of rough, when it gets really cold, and there's a lot of slush on the ground, that's when you want to switch it to snow mode. And when you put it into snow mode, that tells the car to send 60% of the torque to the front and 40% of the torque to the back. If you feel like driving in a more sporty mood, you could switch it to sport mode. That will tell the car to send 60% of the torque to the back, 40% to the front. If you're stuck in some sand or mud situations, then you could rotate it to that mode and it could send up to 100% of the torque to the back axle. With the Active Drive, you also get a brake lock differential. Now, you might have heard of mechanical lockers. That's what you'll find in more hardcore Jeeps like the Wrangler Rubicon. You could also get that installed in the Cherokee, but basically with a brake lock differential, what that does is that it sends torque to the left and right sides of the car. So say when you're three-wheeling, or when one of your wheels is off the ground, or maybe it's in a puddle of water, the car can detect slip, and basically it'll send brake pressure to the one side of the car that's slipping the most, so that the differential could send torque to the other side and help you get going. The downside to that system is that you're using your brake pads to send torque to the other side. But there's many upsides to it. You have less mechanical components, and it's, from a driving perspective, it's also seamless. For most of your off-roading needs, or when you're just driving around and you're encountering a lot of snow, a brake lock differential is sufficient for those needs. Another nice thing about the active drive system is that it also has the ability to disconnect the rear axle or disengage the rear axle. Not that the rear axle will completely fall off the car, but basically, if you know about 4x4 systems, you know that typically the mileage is a little bit worse than a two-wheel drive version, because the engine has to work a little bit harder to rotate more mechanical components. It has to rotate 2 axles at once rather than just one. With the active drive system, you could disconnect the mechanical linkage between the front and the rear axle, so that when you're just driving on normal roads and it's completely dry and you don't need that additional traction, you're basically just converting this car to a two-wheel drive mode, and it's just driving the front axles, whereas the rear axle is just along for the ride. So what that does is that it improves gas mileage. When you do need the traction, the Select Terrain is smart enough to engage the rear axle and then give you more traction. That basically sums up the Active Drive 1. Now, this car is equipped with a $1,200 9-speed automatic transmission that's also equipped with the Active Drive 2 system. The Active Drive 2 means that you also have a 2-speed transfer case. So I could put this car into 4-wheel drive low. And that makes a big difference when the situation gets really rough, really slushy, and there's just a lot of snow on the ground. So that essentially changes your gearing. So you'll go a little bit slower per the engine RPM, but you're driving a lot more torque to the wheels. All right, so I've talked on long enough about the 4x4 system. It's great. It's one of the best all-wheel drive systems out there. And when you're buying a Jeep, that's really one of the things that you're getting with your money. So the other good thing I like about this car is the completely new engine. With 2019, Jeep has offered the all-new 2-liter inline-4 turbocharged engine. It makes 270 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. If you look at the other engine options for the Cherokee, you'll find the 2.4-liter inline-4 multi-air Tiger Shark engine, and also the 3.6-liter Pentastar V6. That V6 is found in nearly all Jeep and FCA cars. But with the all-new 2-liter inline-4 turbo, this engine has the most power, and it certainly is the most fun. So this one is direct injected. It has a lot more torque, and with the right packages, this can tow up to 4,000 pounds. All right, let's move on to the other good thing about this car, and that's the interior. Now, the interior hasn't really changed from prior Cherokees, but this is just, in general, a commentary of the Cherokee interior. I just love how there's just so many features in this car. I have heated steering wheel, I have heated seats, I have ventilated seats, and I have plenty of buttons on the steering wheel to control the stereo, and also control all of your communications and your adaptive cruise control. There's also a bunch of different USB connections here, a couple of 12-volt outlets. Of course, I also have this 8.4-inch touchscreen, the Uconnect 4 system. And in this Cherokee Overland, as equipped, I also have the dual-pane sunroof. As someone has mentioned, that this feels kind of like a Jurassic Park car. It's probably the perfect car you want to take to a safari, because there's just so much visibility in here. It sort of feels like you're driving a convertible. This being a mid-size crossover, there's plenty of room for people on the front, and also plenty of leg room for the second row. And the back row splits in a 60-40 fashion, so you can just fit a lot more stuff in the back when you're trying to transport furniture or something like that. So that sums up the good parts about this car. Let's talk about the bad. And the bad, this is really just a personal preference. And to be honest with you, there's really nothing bad about this car, but I do want to point out a couple of different things that I think Jeep could improve upon. And the first thing that I dislike about this car is the lack of a sport mode button. Now, the Select Terrain comes with a sport mode for the torque split. So like I mentioned before, Putting into sport mode, it sends 60% of the torque to the back and 40% to the front. But it doesn't sharpen the throttle response of this car. Like in most other cars, you could press the sport mode, and that usually means that it'll sharpen the throttle response and also sharpen the suspension setup. I mean, this is a midsize crossover, so I understand that you don't really need to sharpen any sort of suspension because you're not taking this to the track or anything like that. But I would like to have a sport mode button so the car can feel more responsive in terms of acceleration. I can kind of see why they don't want to have a sport mode button, because there is a sport setting in the select terrain, so having a sport mode can also be confusing maybe, but sometimes in highway situations I prefer to have a sport mode so that I could just press that and just have a more responsive car. Another thing I dislike about this car is the lack of a heated seat and ventilated seat and also heated steering wheel button. To access all of that, you have to go to the Uconnect system, and when you first turn on the car, those options flash for a couple of seconds, and you could deactivate it that way, which is convenient. But chances are, if you need the heated seats and the heated steering wheel, you're most likely wearing gloves, so that when you step in, you have to take off your gloves, because this is a capacitive touchscreen and it doesn't really work with gloves. That's kind of an inconvenient thing, whereas if there are dedicated buttons, that's just something that you could toggle on and off very quickly. Now, the last thing I dislike about this car is the 9-speed automatic transmission. In the past, this 9-speed transmission has caused a lot of problems. There was a recall. I think ZF recalled about 500,000 units. But in this one, given the limited amount of driving, I haven't had any major issues. I'm sure they've ironed those things out. But in terms of the responsiveness of the transmission, I'm not really a big fan of. You know, there's the Alfa Romeo Stelvio, which I drove not too long ago, and you can see the review up in the link above. That had a 10-speed automatic transmission from ZF, and I thought that was a fantastic transmission. It shifted very quickly, and when you equip it with the paddle shifters, it made driving a lot more fun. Whereas in this one, shifting is a lot slower for some reason. And mechanically, I understand it might be completely different, but I just found that the shifting action in this car is a lot more sluggish. So if you just step on the car, it takes a little bit of time to downshift to the other gear, and it's not as responsive. So I think that's something that Jeep can improve upon. Maybe put the 10-speed transmission that's found in the Alfa Romeo. Maybe that's not mechanically feasible, I'm not sure, but that's just one of the things that I dislike about this car. All right, now that I've talked about the good, the bad, let's talk about the ugly about the Jeep Cherokee Overland Edition. Now, the Overland sits atop the rest of the Cherokee lineup. If you're shopping around for a Cherokee, you have the Limited, you have the Latitude Plus, the Trailhawk, and at the very top is the Overland. This is the luxury trim. And the nice thing about that is that this car doesn't cut any corners. You know, this car, as is packed with the 2-liter engine option. It's got the $1,200 9-speed automatic transmission that has the Active Drive 2 off-road capability. It's also got the dual-pane panoramic sunroof, and it's got a lot of technology packed in here that could help you with driving, like the lane keep assist, the radar-guided cruise control, and of course the Uconnect touchscreen, the 8.4-inch upgraded system. So there's a lot of features packed into this Overland, and all of that makes this car $43,000. And at that price range, you're looking at other luxury mid-size crossovers. At that price range, you could buy the Alfa Romeo Stelvio, which also has a 280 horsepower engine and also all-wheel drive system. You could even look at the big brother, the Grand Cherokee, and equip it with a V8. So you have to ask yourself, if you're willing to spend that money, are you willing to buy a luxury trim Jeep, or would you rather go with a more luxurious brand or even a bigger car? So that wraps up the good, the bad, and the ugly of the 2019 Jeep Cherokee Overland. So let's summarize the good. It's got great new looks. It's got a powerful new engine. It's got so many features in the interior, and this beautiful Napa leather interior is just so comfortable to sit in, and it's so beautiful to look at. The bad, it doesn't have dedicated sport button and also the heated seat and heated steering wheel and ventilated seat controls. The ugly, of course, the price. Now, if you're curious about the mileage, I've been driving this around for a good several hundred miles, and I've been averaging about 21 to 20 miles per gallon. Now, that's the price that you're going to pay when you buy a car that has 270 horses. Of course, your mileage may vary. I've been driving this under mixed highway and some local roads and some off-road occasions, and I've just been able to produce in the low 20s. Now, cars with smaller engines around the 170 to 200 horsepower range, you could probably expect mileage around the mid-20s, but in here with great power also comes poor gas mileage. And so anyway, let's wrap it up here. Thank you so much for watching. Do you agree with my assessment? Do you like the good, the bad, and the ugly of this car? You agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching till the end. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our other social media channels. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and Instagram, all linked down below. Please give us a like, and if you haven't already, please hit that notification bell so you can get notified anytime we make a new video on the press cars that we review and also all the project cars that we've been working on. Let's wrap it up right there. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Hanson, and I'll see you next time.